Hello, and welcome to the Last 5 Centuries Today show. I'm your host, Michael Wilson.
And I'm Brendan Loftus, your other host. And on today's edition, we'll be discussing how America, while full of diversity, has presented a false veil of equality that's only served some of its citizens.
To start off, we will go to our European exploration and colonial-era expert, Kyra Slimmer.
In 1491, the Americas were populated by at least 93 native tribes. The tribes coexisted within themselves and thrived in their respective territories. The complex societies, such as the Aztec and the Inca, that were made up of roughly 12 million people, had commerce, trades, politics, and religion. In these native societies, land wasn't owned and was instead a communal thing. These societies were evolved and had working lifestyle systems that were soon destroyed when the Europeans came. When the Europeans came, they decided that taking the natives' land was okay because the natives did not technically own it. Once the Europeans settled in America, they often used the natives for profit, even as slaves. This inequality was defended with the argument that slavery liberated natives from savagery. This gives the facade of equality because Europeans were making them into a civilized community. During the 1500s, Bartolomé de las Casas called for equality. While this may seem like a step in the right direction, he instead called for Africans to be enslaved instead of the natives, which is another example of perceived equality being built upon inequality. When Europeans came to America in the 17th century, they were fleeing religious persecution. Because of this shared experience, you might believe that there was equality amongst the colonists, but you'd be wrong. In the individual colonies, there was a lot of religious inequality. On the broad spectrum, the Puritans believed that they were better than everyone and that they resided in a city upon a hill. None of the four folkways, the backcountry, the Puritans, the Quakers, or the Anglicans, had equality in their own societies. In terms of gender, each of the folkways were inherently unequal. The Puritans believed that men were better than women. The Quakers believed that women in everyday life were unequal, but in the afterlife, equality was reached. This may seem to be good, but at the heart of this veil of equality was the belief that women were men in the afterlife, and therefore not truly equal. Although in the backcountry, men and women were equal in work, men were able to get away with abusing their wives, and therefore the backcountry fell short on equality as well. Finally, in the Anglican society, men were the masters of the house and controlled everything that their wives did. None of these folkways gave women their equality and laid a foundation for an inherently unequal nation to come. Nathaniel Bacon, a wealthy businessman, led a revolt in 1676, made up of indentured servants, with the hope to repeal Berkeley's law. Although Bacon's revolt failed, it scared the upper class to abandon the system of indentured servitude. While this may seem to be a step forwards in equality in America, the owners of plantations replaced the indentured servants with slaves. With the rise of the tobacco industry, especially in the area around Chesapeake Bay, came the first African slave in 1619. During 1770, to have liberty meant having the power to rule. At this time, the richest 10% of the colonists owned half of the wealth and viewed the poor as lazy, shiftless, and responsible for their own plight. This inequality was rampant during the 18th century. The Revolutionary War began because tensions rose in the colonies over the perceived unfair treatment by the British. This was a fight for freedom that led to the Bill of Rights being written in May 1787. The Bill of Rights gives the people of the United States civil liberties and protection from the government. While it may seem like it was a big step towards equality, it did not grant equality to all. Slavery existed and flourished. Black men couldn't vote, and women couldn't vote either. By the 1800s, there were no more indentured servants, and the North became a free labor society, while the South became a slave labor society. By the 1840s, most of the northern states abolished slavery, but it was still abundant in the South. During the presidency of John Adams, the Alien and Sedition Acts were passed. These are both in direct violation of the First Amendment and suppressed equality in the United States. In 1841, a wave of Irish and German immigrants came pouring into America. That is why today 60% of Americans can trace their roots back to Ireland or Germany. While this migration increased the diversity of ethnicity in America, there is no equality. The Irish were treated like trash and were seen as lazy and drunk. The Germans were treated better because they were rich and Protestant, unlike the Irish, who were Catholic. The difference in the treatment of these two groups of migrants paints a clear picture of the inequality in America at the time, especially in terms of religion. I'm Kyra Slimmer, and this has been an insight into the origins of America. Back to you in the newsroom.
Thanks, Kyra. That was a wonderful inside look at the absolutely horrifying bedrock our beautiful nation was founded upon.
And on a different note, let's get a quick word from our sponsors.
You know what I love most about Pepsi?
What?
I love that on a warm day like this, it's the perfect drink to crack open with the boys.
Yeah, I agree. It's really cold and refreshing to have on a nice warm Sunday.
What I love most about Pepsi is that it's bottled in wonderful states such as North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware.
Where's Pepsi's lesser counterpart Coca-Cola bottled?
Coca-Cola is bottled in Georgia.
Whoa. Wow. I guess we know why my Pepsi, my little baby Pepsi, is so superior.
Moving forward with our scheduled broadcast, we'll be visiting Noah's Sizzle and Bacon for our porker of a story in the Civil War and Reconstruction era.
The Civil War was founded upon the belief of the conservation of the Union, and helping those slave people too. Maybe, if we get around to it. But that's not the point. On April 12, 1861, the Battle of Fort Sumter prompted the Civil War, a war that the Union Army would totally win, and the country would become one again. Not exactly true. The Civil War would prove to be a bloody 4 years, and hundreds of thousands of lives would be lost. All the fighting for what? Well, in the beginning of the war, the focus was on the pressing issue of literally half our country leaving and becoming their own nation, where they would continue without the disruptions of the damn Yankees and continue utilizing slave labor to boost their thriving economy. But, as time went on, the narrative of the war shifted, and although the State of the Union was always an issue, the problem of slavery moved to the forefront of Unionist ideals. Initially, as a tactic to destroy the Southern economy, freeing the slaves turned into a true widespread social issue. Well, maybe slavery is bad. From then on, the war was remembered as the North's noble fight against slavery. Lincoln, as a president, also changed his narrative with time, shifting the focus of the war from the Union to the slaves. And he had the power to enact significant change. The glorified image of the Union heroes has ignored the appalling lack of equality when Union soldiers originally sent blacks risking their lives, fleeing their masters to join the ranks, right back to the plantations. But with enough time, enough slaves forced themselves into the Union ranks and the soldiers had no chance but to accept them, only to be turned around and used as cannon fodder. As the war progressed, black regiments were formed, but only under the leadership of a white captain. This led to blacks struggling to find pride in the cause that they were fighting for, but fought out of necessity instead. The hope that their actions would grant generations freedoms that they were denied. Women at the time were also in an upwards battle for equality. Union women were given little freedoms and the ability to set up aid organizations and take some of men's jobs out of necessity, but they were never allowed to fight. Southern women, on the other hand, were more aggressive about gaining their freedoms, and unlike Union women, shot back and attacked Union soldiers. Most women's only chance to fight for the cause was to utilize their femininity associated with women at the time, mostly by seducing soldiers. Some women chose to dress up as men to join the lines, but for most, this was too much of a risk. The Civil War granted freedoms to women and blacks, but once the war ended, women's freedoms were revoked, and blacks still struggled to gain basic rights. As we progress past the Civil War, we move into Reconstruction and the U.S.'s attempt to unite the nation while sustaining the crippled Southern economy. Following the Civil War, tensions were still high and blacks struggled to find viable employment. Radical Republicans at the time hoped to put into place policies such as the Freedmen's Bureau and the 40 acres and a mule. The 40 acres and a mule policy was shot down due to the fact that it was too radical and therefore was never put into place. However, there was little employment for newly freed blacks, and the Freedmen's Bureau attempted to fix this. And although they found short-term success with time, the organization struggled to situate blacks and assist them in finding work. Because of this, blacks were forced into a new de facto system of slavery, sharecropping. Jobless and unqualified blacks were forced to go back to labor jobs at plantations, and in some cases, the same master that had just freed them. Poor whites were also affected by this new form of oppression. Sharecropping was able to trap people into unpayable debt without a viable option of repaying their employers. While being legal, this new form of slavery was an easy way to exploit the blacks, who were targetable due to their lower class status. During Reconstruction, a wave of Confederate sympathizers also came into power, the Cult of a Lost Cause, determined to rewrite the history in which the Civil War was just a brotherly fight between the North and the South, not over slavery, and now that the blacks were at fault for the South's current state. A forced decree of Southern black freedom put into place by Northern lawmakers especially infuriated this group. Their agrarian economy, fueled by slave labor, was ripped out from under them due to their renewed status in the Union. Their uprising against the acts put into place to balance the scales between the slave owners and the slaves were met with mass disapproval, and eventually were just revoked. White Southerners made efforts to preserve the past in which they were created above the black man just because of their skin color. Masked under a veil of pride and a celebration of their heritage, this movement gave a platform to people to voice their grievances and to place blame upon newly freed blacks. Leading up to the 1900s, organizations like the KKK were able to amass hundreds of thousands of members and gain political power with a platform of hatred. But the largest example of false equality truly comes through in the 13th Amendment that ended slavery, but at the same time allowed blacks to be put right back in. Slavery was made illegal, unless as a punishment for a crime, created as a loophole in which felons can become slaves, and in most cases, blacks can be disproportionately targeted for crimes such as loitering, and be put onto chain gangs. And this is America. False promises of freedom and equality in the country that guarantees liberty and justice for all. Noah Bacon, last 5 centuries today. Back to you.
Thank you for that wonderful expose on our nation-defining disagreements over African Americans.
We'd now like to take a break for a public service announcement.
For many years, now the youth of our nation have been terribly and deeply abused by street poles. What might seem harmless and sometimes helpful due to the street signs they hold have actually been an epidemic for our poor youth. Often distracted by friends and their phones, many young people have been walking neck first into these poles and walking away with gruesome neck bruises. I believe awareness is the key to stopping this epidemic. If kids are aware of these terrible poles injuries, I can only hope they will avoid them next time. As the people say, the more you know.
Now that's a real tragedy.
That it is. That it is. Moving on, we will go to our early 1900s expert, Nuno Carvalho, for a pimpin' story.
Oh, I didn't see you there. Well, since I'm here, I guess I'll talk to you about U.S. history. After the South got their asses kicked in the Civil War, came the Gilded Age, a time of power and wealth for all of the three guys that got to experience it. There were a lot of pushes toward diversity in the United States at this time. It was also a time where we saw great pushes toward diversity, and we saw a lot of immigrants come to the U.S. We saw Italians come here, probably due to the fact that they were probably tired of eating pasta all the goddamn time. Chinese and Japanese, who immigrated to the West Coast, and Jews, due to the slowly increasing persecution in Europe. All of these people came here to find work and to help their families find freedom, and in the Italians' case, to get away from all the pasta. These immigrants became laborers in agricultural and industrial fields, and also began to saturate the market for cheap labor, and factory owners benefited the most from the sudden rush of inexpensive labor. When I say factory owners, I mean Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Vanderbilt. These guys owned basically every business at this time. These three gentlemen were also the reason why we were becoming less economically diverse. How, you may ask? Well, like I said earlier, they owned almost everything. This is also the time where we see the rise in the idea of social Darwinism, which tries to maintain the huge economic gap. And to fight this, labor unions were created. This is also the time where we see decrease in racial diversity with Plessy v. Ferguson. After the Gilded Age came the 20th century. The first decade or so was called the Progressive Era. For all of you who didn't take U.S. history, which all of you should have since you're in this class right now watching me talk about U.S. history. Anyway, the Progressive Era. Sounds cool, but it wasn't. I mean, it was alright. It wasn't that bad. Shit gets worse later on with that guy with the funny mustache and his weird dabs. Well, like I was saying, the Progressive Era was a time of reform. A lot happened during this time, such as Teddy getting rid of monopolies. Yeah, I know. Finally. This helped balance out the economy and reduce the wealth gap between the poor and the rich. It only reduced it a little bit, but we still had a long way to go if we didn't want to make it somewhat fair without becoming a communist society. Let's just take a step back real quick. Remember how Teddy made monopolies illegal? Yeah, well, a journalist group known as the Muckrakers had something to do with that. They basically exposed everything. Think of them as an old WikiLeaks, but who did good things. Like I was saying, the Muckrakers, but a special woman called Edith Tarbell, were responsible for the ban on monopolies. On the immigrant front, the Hull House was founded by Jane Addams in Chicago. This provided a safe harbor for immigrants to get job and education. Speaking of badass women, this was also a time of big feminist wave. Although there were around 8 million women working for wages by 1900, women still fought against the idea that they should stay home and that men were the ones that had to go to work because it was still viewed as a bad thing. A major improvement in diversity was the fact that women could vote in half of the states by 1900 and would be allowed to vote everywhere by the 1920s. And that's pretty fucking amazing. Yeah, so all of that progressed into World War I. Nothing much happened in World War I, but we saw the creation of 369th Regiment. This regiment was the first all-black regiment in the US Army. They were nicknamed the Harlem Hellfighters by the Germans due to their toughness and the fact that they never lost a man through capture, never lost a trench or a foot ground to the enemy. They helped change white Americans' opinion on African American soldiers and paved the way for future black soldiers. These guys were badass. This is also the time when the Great Migration started and made the country even more diverse. You could also see a push for cultural pluralism. This is the idea of people practicing their cultural traditions while still being American for you who don't know. Now, that we got the good things that push for diversity out of the way, let's talk about the things that pushed against it. Hey, guess who's back? The KKK, and now they burn crosses. Alright, that's all the time they get. The South passed vagrancy laws, which meant that black men suffering from unemployment could be arrested. Riots also started after a boy got drowned for crossing a segregationist line at a beach in Chicago. These riots resulted in 76 people being lynched, and some were soldiers in World War I. After this, whites went to black communities, burned them, and killed 330 blacks. Oh yeah, and remember that small reduction in the wealth gap back in the Progressive Era? Well, the top 5% wealthiest people now own more than the bottom 60% poorest people. Yeah, so much for improvement. I'm Papa Noons. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you for that great insight into a very terrible time in America.
Yeah, thank you. And now we'll go to the streets for Noah and some live reporting interviews.
Now I set out onto the streets of Santa Rosa to ask the civilians what America is to them. I'll see you there.
We have Sophie Hildebrand, and we're asking her, Sophie, what is America to you?
America is a place where diversity is celebrated, and we should have lots of equal opportunities, even though that's not always the case. But it's about the strive.
I think it's sort of the freedom to have you create your own myth, in a sense that you can have the liberty to model something that is not necessarily part of the dream, but at the same time becomes, your own motif.
Yeah.
But what I do know from studying history is the opportunities for my family across Europe were so much less.
Yeah.
People were treated so much worse. There was so little ability to rise and to find your own path and to succeed in ways that might threaten other people's power. And so I never have a doubt, no matter how wrong we get it, that it was so much worse for my family in Europe, and that they knew they were coming to something better. And so I think that even though we're never quite as perfect as, say, the media pretends that it's so awful. I think that there's a real serious recognition of what power meant in Europe and other places, and that this is better.
So we were wondering, what is America to you?
America is a land of opportunity, a land of freedom, and it's a melting pot where different people of different cultures and experiences and ways of life can get together, have some really good food, and learn from each other.
To me, it's freedom and love of my country, and hopefully a good future for my children. If they have resources that they can access, that's really important. There are a lot of resources in this country, but the young people have to have access to them. And that's the most important thing for them to get ahead. I've been here for 85 years, and I have lived through 5 wars, and I have survived because I lived in America, thank God. And I hope that the world would come to realize that it's not good to just keep making war, to make money, to get control. The important thing is we need education and we need tolerance for all people. That's what America is all about. So I consider myself lucky to have been born here and to have survived here after 5 wars. And I'm hoping that my children won't have 5 wars to live through like I did.
A lovely feel of the pulse of the people.
And now we'll go to Mike and Brendan live for some mid to late 1900s reporting.
Thanks, Mike and Brendan. I'll take you through the Cold War. During the build-up to the Cold War, the United States feared communism and decided that the idea of communism itself was our enemy. So we got our guns and hunted them down. If you were a communist, you were a traitor. Period. Sounds accepting, doesn't it? This time was where a person's First Amendment rights were violated, with their freedom of speech being infringed upon. The fear of communist Russia and its nuclear weapons kept people in line. In this time, there were spy trials where people were executed, like Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. The couple was executed basically because of the bloodthirst of the community, with no evidence. When I say no evidence, I mean someone looked at them and said, hey, they sold information about our nukes to the commies. And everyone believed them, including the courts. These examples show that America went against their core values of diversity and freedom of belief. We instead united against diversity, and essentially, democracy. We united against living styles, opinions, religions, races, and a myriad of other things, which contradicted the founding beliefs of our country. We pride ourselves on our history, but we overlook our dark parts, which are one of the main defining characteristics we should look to form who we are today. As we move out of the era of the Cold War, we come to a time where instead of defining by beliefs, we define by our actions.
Thanks, Mike. And now I'm here to lead you through the counterculture movements of the 50s and 60s. The Vietnam era, a time when the American people utilized their constitutional rights to protest the war in Vietnam. People gathered to promote peace, smoke weed, and save lives. We demonstrated diversity at this point in time as it was people of all races, ethnicities, genders, and walks of life coming together for a common goal. It was a nationwide movement that gained traction to pull our troops out of the war and bring them home. The 1950s and 60s were a big time of growth as a country where we began to see how many counterculture movements demonstrating diversity and the people coming together to protest and utilize their collective voices. The biggest of these counterculture movements was the Civil Rights Movement, with the Reverend Dr. King at the helm. As we saw earlier, with Reconstruction, the blacks were not truly free even after slavery was abolished, thanks to the loophole of the 13th Amendment. Now moving through World War I and World War II, there were still intense amounts of racist persecution and inequality. All this pent-up abuse and unfairness started to get dealt with in the mid-1950s, or at least so we thought. In the 50s, over 50% of blacks lived in poverty, and 17 southern states and DC itself required segregation in its schools. The government claimed that these schools would be separate but equal. However, that was another false veil. As proved by Brown versus Board of Education, And now, starting in 1954, we saw the opposite, where schools were forced to integrate based on the decision by the Supreme Court. That separate but equal is inherently unequal. It's sad how long it took before America could become the emblem of diversity that we now know today. While America is a giant melting pot, it takes a long time for the ingredients to start to melt, and we still have a long way to go.
Alright everybody, I'm Brendan with my co-host Mike, and we're gonna go crack a cold one. This is Last 5 Centuries Today, signing off.
I already fucked it. Fuck! Fuck it. Oh, fuck, okay. Oh, fuck. Fuck me. Fuck my... Fuck!
You're an idiot. Come on, we are.
Fuck! Fuck! From the Union. Fuck you, Brendan! Fuck, okay. Fuck. Simple. Okay, fuck. Fuck, you forgot to start it. Fuck. God fucking damn it. What the fuck?
What?
It's not starting. What the fuck are you doing?
I'm clicking on it.
Fuck. Fuck me. God, fuck my... Fuck. Okay.
In it. Fuck.
And fuck. Fuck my... Fuck.
Beyblade, let it rip.
God. I blanked. Remember? Okay, fuck! Remember how Teddy illegalized titty slips? Where are you filming that? Think of them as a modern wiki. Fuck, tits, yeah. Probably
That's the first thing I thought about.
God damn it. You Lacey v. Ferguson. Fuck. Ferguson. Wait, what's up?
Damn it!
Damn it, Nuno.
Sorry.
We're almost out of battle.
Was it fake for the few guys that got... Fuck me! Since I'm here...
No! Nuno!
You guys just,
what the fuck did we do?
You guys just are trying to not to laugh. I'm with wealth and power and fuck that guy.